marble figure stands so real it seems to hold a breath. The techniques that allowed ancient sculptors to achieve this lifelike perfection were not magic, but a brilliant fusion of science and art. By the end of this journey, you will understand exactly how stone and bronze were transformed into beings that feel eternally alive. How did artists carve skin that appears soft to the touch? What secret methods gave their statues a soulful, piercing gaze? The answers reveal a lost world of innovation. What does it truly mean to capture life in an unyielding material? That intimate knowledge of stone was a sculptor's first and most vital tool. They did not see a block of marble as an empty canvas, but as a living partner in the creative process. A sculptor would spend days, sometimes weeks, simply observing a new block, studying its veins, its subtle color shifts, and even its faint sounds when tapped. They were searching for the form sleeping within. This philosophy of working with the stone's nature, not against it, meant they selected specific marbles for specific artistic goals. Parian marble, from the Greek island of Paros, was prized for its almost sugar-like fine grain. It could hold the most delicate details, like the feathered edge of an eyelid or the soft curl of a lip. Pentelic marble, from Mount near Athens, contained tiny crystals of mica that gave its surface a gentle, inner glow, a quality that seemed to mimic the warmth of living skin under sunlight. This was not a random choice. It was a deliberate decision to use a material that already possessed a lifelike quality, making the artist's job one of revelation, not just creation. The sculptor's role was to remove everything that was not the figure, to set the captured form free from its stony prison. This profound respect for the raw material guided the first, most dramatic step in the transformation, the roughing out of the figure from the block. The thunderous rhythm of the mallet striking the point chisel was the sculpture's first heartbeat. This was not a delicate process. It was a controlled demolition, where the artist, armed with heavy tools, would attack the pristine block to liberate the rough silhouette of a figure. Great chunks of stone fell away, revealing the most basic outline of a head, shoulders, and limbs. Yet within this apparent chaos lay a deep mathematical order. Sculptors did not guess at the size of an arm or the length of a leg. They followed established proportional systems, often based on the harmonious ratios of the golden section, which provided a reliable, invisible grid for the entire body. These canonical measurements, sometimes recorded on workshop charts, ensured that every part of the figure related perfectly to every other part. A knee was placed not by instinct alone, but because the system dictated its exact position relative to the hip and the ankle. This rigorous framework was the sculptor's safety net. It prevented any fundamental error in scale that would make a finished statue feel awkward or unnatural, no matter how beautifully its surface was later polished. A figure born from such perfect proportions already possessed an innate, believable balance, a crucial foundation for the illusion of life. With this stable anatomical skeleton locked in stone, the artist could then move from the general to the specific, trading heavy tools for finer chisels to begin defining the powerful structures of muscle and bone beneath the skin. With the rough form established, the sculptor's focus shifted inward to the hidden architecture of the body. A profound understanding of anatomy was the true secret behind the illusion of life. These artists knew the human form from the inside out. They carved with an intimate knowledge of how the collarbone meets the shoulder blade, creating that subtle, bony ridge beneath the skin. They shaped the rib cage not as a solid cage, but as a flexible structure that seems to expand with a quiet breath. They even captured the precise way the kneecap is embedded within the powerful tendon of the thigh muscle. This was not a superficial study. While much was learned from observing athletes in the gymnasium and the palestra, where every straining muscle was visible, some historical accounts suggest that artists may have gained deeper insight through limited, ceremonial practices of examination. This dedicated pursuit of knowledge allowed them to build a figure from the skeleton upward. First, the robust frame of the pelvis was defined, providing a solid anchor for the torso. Then, the long, graceful lines of the femur and tibia were carefully articulated, ensuring the statue's weight was distributed with a natural, believable stance. Over this bony scaffold, the layers of muscle were then meticulously rendered. The sculptor's chisel carved the tense bulge of a biceps, the firm sweep of the abdominal muscles, and the complex interweaving of the back muscles that braced the entire form. This anatomical truth created an undeniable sense of internal volume and tension. You can feel the potential for movement, as if the figure is merely pausing and could at any moment shift its weight, take a step, or turn its head. This invisible skeleton, this perfectly understood framework of bone and sinew, is what separates a cold, lifeless statue from a form that convinces you it possesses a living body. Only with this solid internal foundation could the artist then turn to a far more delicate task, the rendering of the body's soft, supple surfaces that truly make the stone seem to breathe. But the sculptor's work was far from finished with the bones and muscles alone. The most astonishing transformation occurred when the artist traded the sharp claw chisel for flat, polished abrasives. This was the stage of modeling the flesh, a meticulous process of softening and blending the hard stone into surfaces that appeared to yield to the touch. The sculptor was no longer carving anatomy, but the very quality of skin itself. They would create a subtle, soft fold on the abdomen, a different texture entirely from the taut, stretched skin over a flexed rib cage. Around the kneecap, they might render a slight puckering, a delicate texture that tells your eye this is living tissue, not inert rock. This illusion was achieved through a masterful manipulation of light and shadow carved directly into the stone, a technique sometimes called sfumato. The sculptor would polish certain areas to a high sheen, making them catch the light and appear to project forward, while leaving adjacent areas slightly more matte, creating soft, transitional shadows that suggest a gentle, rounded form. It is this painstaking attention to the body's surface that tricks the mind into seeing warmth and softness where only cold, hard mineral exists. The final result is a surface that seems to invite a hand, convincing you that if you were to reach out, you would feel not polished stone, but the supple warmth of living skin. This tactile presence was the ultimate goal, but one final, brilliant step would elevate the entire work from a masterful imitation to a being that seemed to possess a soul. The final transformation of cold marble into warm skin was a matter of patience and polish. After the forms were carved, the sculptor embarked on a long, laborious process of smoothing, using progressively finer abrasives. Coarse emery stone would be replaced by powdered pumice, and finally, by soft pads of felt or leather. This was not a simple buffing, but a deep, exhaustive burnishing that could take weeks. The goal was to close the stone's microscopic pores, to create a surface so seamless and reflective that it interacted with light exactly like human skin. The marble would develop a deep, liquid gloss, a sheen that seemed to hold light within it rather than merely bounce it back. Yet for many masterworks, this was still not the final step. Artists often applied a secret final layer, a heated mixture of wax and subtle pigments known as. This warm, molten coating was carefully rubbed into the stone, filling any remaining microscopic imperfections. It acted as both a protective sealant and a magical enhancer. The wax gave the pure white marble a soft, warm, ivory-like tone, and it added a degree of translucency that made the surface appear to glow from within, as if lit by a faint inner light. This was the ultimate deception, a surface that no longer read as stone to the human eye, but as living, breathing tissue. With the body now possessing this astonishingly lifelike skin, all that remained was to give this perfected form a soul, through the meticulous carving of its most expressive features, the face and the flowing hair. The face, now a canvas of warm, polished stone, still lacked its most vital feature, a conscious gaze. To solve this, sculptors employed a technique of breathtaking ingenuity, the separate inlaying of eyes. They did not simply carve the eyes from the same block of marble. Instead, they carefully cut out the sockets and set within them meticulously crafted inserts. The whites of the eyes were fashioned from gleaming materials like bone or pale stone, while the pupils were tiny, perfectly shaped discs of polished obsidian or dark marble. This was far more than decoration. It was optical science. The polished, dark pupil, set against a bright white field, created a reflective, wet-looking surface that actively captured and played with light. This gave the statue a specific, engaging focus, making it appear to look directly at you from across a room, or to gaze intently into a distant horizon. The precise angle and depth of this inset could whisper a universe of emotion. A deeply set pupil might convey the serene contemplation of a philosopher lost in thought, while a wide, forward-facing one could project the fierce, unblinking determination of a warrior. This single, brilliant detail was the final spark of consciousness, transforming a masterfully carved form into a being that possessed a soul and a palpable, intelligent presence. This expressive power was then framed and amplified by the artist's next great challenge, the rendering of the figure's hair. The hair of a marble goddess was not a solid helmet, but a cascade of individual silken strands. To achieve this, sculptors wielded their tools with the precision of a jeweler. They used a drill, a tool that could bore deep into the stone, to create dramatic undercuts beneath each carved curl or lock of hair. These deep, shadowed recesses were the secret to volume and softness, making the stone above appear to lift away from the scalp, floating with a weightless grace. The contrast was everything. The rough, porous texture left by the drill bit in the shadows made the smoothly polished crest of each curl seem to catch the light, creating a dazzling play of brightness and depth that the eye interprets as soft, pliable hair. This same mastery of texture was applied to the rendering of fabric. A sculptor could make marble mimic the heaviest wool or the finest, wind-blown linen. They carved deep, rigid folds to suggest thick cloth pulled taut over a knee, and used the sharp edge of a chisel to incise hair-thin, flowing lines that made a delicate mantle appear to flutter in an unseen breeze. The most breathtaking demonstration of this skill was the technique known as wet drapery. Here, the artist depicted fabric as if drenched, clinging transparently to the body beneath. This required carving two distinct textures in a single surface: the sleek, tight press of the wet cloth against a thigh or a torso, and the softer, rumpled gather of the same material where it pulled away. It was an artistic duel with the stone, a challenge to make one unyielding material simultaneously represent the hard muscle of a leg and the soft, damp linen clinging to it. This command over such contrasting textures, from flowing hair to fluttering silk, proved the sculptor could make stone obey any command, convincing you of its softness. Yet for some of the most dynamic and lifelike figures of the ancient world, artists turned from stone to metal, employing a revolutionary casting process that allowed for even greater freedom and realism. This same artistic ambition, the drive to capture life in motion, found its ultimate expression not in stone, but in bronze. The indirect lost wax method was a revolutionary process, a kind of alchemy that transformed soft, pliable wax into enduring metal. It began not with a block, but with a core of clay, a rough armature that defined the figure's inner volume. Over this, the artist would build up a skin of beeswax, warm and malleable. With fine tools, they could work this wax with an intimacy impossible in stone, pressing and smoothing to create the delicate network of veins on the back of a hand, the subtle tension of a tendon in the neck, or the fine, almost invisible texture of skin over a kneecap. This wax original was the artist's true masterpiece, a model of breathtaking detail. Then came the magic. This delicate wax figure was entirely encased in a fire-resistant clay mold, creating a perfect negative space of the sculpture. The entire mold was then heated in a kiln, and the wax, true to the process's name, was lost. It melted away, flowing out through specially designed channels, leaving behind a hollow cavity within the hardened clay, an exact void in the shape of the original wax model. Into this waiting space, artisans would pour molten bronze, a searing liquid metal that filled every microscopic crevice the wax had occupied. Once the metal cooled, and the outer clay mold was broken away, revealing the bronze sculpture within, a perfect metallic twin of the ephemeral wax model. This hollow casting created a figure that was miraculously both strong and lightweight, allowing for poses of impossible grace. A bronze figure could leap forward, an arm could stretch out into space without the fear of snapping under its own weight. It could capture a single, fleeting moment, a dancer poised on one toe or a discus thrower coiled at the peak of his swing. But the process was not yet complete. The rough bronze surface, fresh from the mold, required the artist's final touch to achieve its lifelike splendor. Fresh from the mold, a bronze statue was a gleaming, golden figure, but it was not yet finished. The artist's final act was to breathe color and warmth into the metal through a sophisticated layering of materials. The bronze surface was meticulously polished to a mirror-like shine, but then it was often deliberately altered. Artisans applied acidic solutions or buried the statue in specially prepared earth, inducing a chemical reaction that created a rich, protective skin called a patina. This was not a sign of neglect, but a controlled transformation. A sculptor might coax forth a deep, earthy green to suggest age and nobility, or a subtle, dark brown to add depth and shadow to the musculature, much like the natural tonal variations of sun-kissed skin. This was only the beginning of the color palette. For the most striking realism, separate materials were inlaid into the bronze itself. Thin sheets of shimmering copper were carefully hammered into pre-carved recesses to form lips and nipples, giving these areas a warm, reddish hue that pulsed with a suggestion of blood flow. Gleaming silver might be set for teeth, and eyes were often crafted from polished bone, colored glass, or stone, complete with dark pupils. This multi-material approach, known as polychromy, meant a classical bronze statue was never a monotonous, single-colored object. It was a vibrant, textured being, its metallic skin accented with flashes of copper, silver, and glass that caught the light in different ways. This complex visual symphony created a far more convincing illusion than a single, uniform surface ever could. It moved beyond mere form, capturing the subtle, variegated tones of a living body. This artistic sophistication raises a compelling question. How did these revolutionary techniques, from the revelation of form in marble to the polychrome brilliance of bronze, develop and change across the centuries of ancient art? The rigid, almost block-like figures of the Archaic period stand as a testament to a search for perfect form. These early Kouros statues, with their stiff frontal stance and one foot slightly advanced, seem more like architectural pillars than living beings. Their faces are dominated by that unmistakable archaic smile, a uniform curve of the lips that conveys a state of ideal being rather than a genuine, felt emotion. This was art governed by formula, an attempt to capture a divine or heroic ideal in a perfectly balanced, symmetrical shell. But a revolution was stirring. The transition into the classical period marked a profound shift in thought, a move from representing how a person should look to how a person actually stands, moves, and exists in space. The catalyst for this change was a single, brilliant innovation known as contrapposto. Imagine a figure pausing mid-stride, its weight settled mostly on one straight, supporting leg. This simple, natural act forces the entire body to respond. The hip on the weight-bearing side rises, causing the shoulder on that same side to drop in a gentle compensation. The result is a subtle, flowing S-curve that travels through the entire torso, a cascade of anatomical cause and effect. This was no longer a static, formal pose. It was a snapshot of a living body in a state of balanced rest, a moment of potential energy where the figure seems capable of shifting its weight and walking away at any second. Masters did not just use contrapposto, creating mathematical systems, like his famous Canon, that defined the precise harmonic ratios between every part of the body. This was the marriage of rigorous geometry to observed life, creating figures that felt both perfectly ideal and perfectly real. This newfound fluency with the body's mechanics opened the door for artists like to capture even more fleeting moments of action. His, or discus thrower, is a coiled spring of tension, frozen at the peak of his wind-up. Every muscle is defined by its role in the impending motion, a breathtaking study of anatomy in service of dynamic realism. Yet this classical pursuit of idealized, balanced beauty was only another step in the journey. The final, dramatic leap would come in the Hellenistic era, where sculptors cast aside ideal types to embrace the raw, unvarnished truth of human experience in all its varied forms. Hellenistic artists pushed beyond balanced athletes and serene gods to explore the entire spectrum of life. They carved the wrinkled, time-worn faces of elderly fishermen and the soft, plump bodies of playful children. They dared to depict not just ideal beauty, but also the anguish of defeat, the frenzy of battle, and the peaceful repose of sleep. This was a theater of human emotion carved in stone. Figures were arranged in sprawling, complex groups with twisting, dramatic compositions that forced the viewer to walk all the way around the sculpture to understand its full story. The famous group is a masterpiece of this turbulent energy, capturing the terrifying struggle of a priest and his sons entangled by sea serpents. Every muscle strains, every face contorts in a very different, very personal expression of agony and fear. This was not an idealized response, it was a raw human one. To achieve such a complex, multi-figure scene, where limbs and serpentine coils intertwine in a seemingly chaotic, yet perfectly balanced whole, required an absolute command of anatomy from every conceivable angle. The sculptor had to understand how a torso twists when the hips are pulled in one direction and the shoulders in another, and how light would fall across these deeply undercut, dramatic forms. This was realism pushed to its physical and emotional limits, a celebration of the human form in all its diversity, from the peak of youthful strength to the quiet vulnerability of old age. This centuries-long evolution, from rigid formulas to fluid, emotional masterpieces, was not accidental. It was the result of a deliberate, conscious pursuit of naturalism, a journey made possible by the sculptor's increasingly sophisticated and specialized toolkit. Each tool in the sculptor's kit was a key to unlocking a different layer of realism. The point chisel, with its sharp, unforgiving tip, was the first to meet the stone, striking with a percussive rhythm to knock away large, unwanted masses and reveal the figure's rough silhouette. Once the general form was freed, the claw chisel took over. Its toothed edge, like a metal comb, scraped away the rough peaks left by the point, refining the blocky shapes into the distinct planes of a torso or a limb. This was the stage where the flat surfaces of anatomy began to emerge. For the final smoothing, the artist switched to a flat chisel, patiently shaving the stone down to a nearly finished surface, preparing it for the abrasive powders that would later impart a skin-like finish. But perhaps the most dramatic tool for creating the illusion of life was the drill, especially the bow drill. By spinning a sharp bit back and forth with a rhythmic pull of the bow, the sculptor could bore deep into the stone. This was not merely for making holes, it was a tool for carving with shadow. A deep, drilled recess under a lock of hair created a pocket of darkness that made the polished marble above appear to lift freely from the scalp. The same technique gave depth to the corners of eyes, adding a moist, shadowed quality that enhanced their expressive gaze, and it created the intricate, overlapping folds of heavy drapery. These tools were not wielded with brute force alone. Each one required a delicate touch, a specific angle of attack, and an intuitive understanding of how its mark would ultimately play with light. The true mastery lay in knowing when to use the aggressive point, the refining claw, the smoothing flat chisel, or the shadow-making drill. This orchestration of tools, this choreography of force and finesse, allowed the artist to translate a mental image into a physical form with texture, depth, and a palpable presence. Yet the finest tools in the world were meaningless without the artist's most vital asset, a deeply cultivated power of observation. The sculptor's workshop was not a closed studio, but an extension of the public square. Beyond the charts of perfect ratios, the most vital classroom was the open-air gymnasium, where athletes trained in the nude under the Mediterranean sun. Here, artists became dedicated students of life itself. They watched the discus thrower, noting how the muscles of his back and shoulders rippled and locked into a single, cohesive mechanism of power. They observed the runner at rest, seeing how his weight settled onto one hip, causing a subtle chain reaction through his entire frame. This was not passive looking, it was an active, analytical process. They studied how sunlight carved out the form, creating sharp, defining shadows in the hollow of a tensed abdomen and soft, graduated tones across the curve of a thigh. This direct observation of the living, moving body provided an endless catalog of authentic details that no system of proportions could ever supply. It allowed the artist to capture the slight asymmetry of a real human being, the way one shoulder might sit just a fraction higher than the other, or how a single, faint crease appears beside the eye in a genuine smile. These tiny, imperfect truths are what separate a mathematically perfect form from a believable, living one. The athlete's body, in its peak condition, became the ultimate reference for the interplay of bone, muscle, and skin under the dynamic conditions of strain and repose. This empirical study was then filtered through a sophisticated understanding of how the human eye perceives the world, blending raw visual data with optical science to create a final work that felt more real than reality itself. These artists understood that perfect proportions would look wrong to a human eye. A statue destined for a high pedestal to be looked up at from the ground was not carved with mathematically equal limbs. Its legs might be made slightly shorter, and its torso and head subtly elongated. From that low vantage point, this deliberate distortion corrected the foreshortening effect, making the figure appear perfectly balanced and noble. The carving of details was also a calculation of light. In the soft, uneven glow of an oil lamp inside a temple, deep shadows could swallow delicate features. A sculptor would therefore carve the eyes and the lines of a drapery more deeply and sharply than they would for a statue in bright sunlight. Up close, these features might seem exaggerated, even harsh. But from the intended distance and in the planned lighting, they resolved into perfect, lifelike clarity. This was not a flaw in their technique, but its highest expression. Realism was a flexible concept, a visual experience carefully engineered for a single, perfect moment of viewing. This masterful manipulation of perception extended beyond form and shadow to an element we often forget, the vibrant language of color. The pristine white marble we associate with classical purity is a grand historical misconception. In reality, the ancient world was a place of vibrant, almost shocking color. Sculptors did not consider a statue finished until it had been brought to life with a full spectrum of paints. Skin was rendered in warm, fleshy tones hair was painted with rich browns or gleaming gold. Lips received a dash of cinnabar red, and clothing was decorated with brilliant blues from lapis lazuli or lush greens from malachite. These were not subtle washes, but bold, defining applications of color. Advanced imaging techniques like ultraviolet light and raking light have become our time machines, revealing a hidden world. Scientists shine these specialized lights onto a statue's surface, and suddenly, the ghost of a painted pattern emerges. Faint traces of pigment, invisible to the naked eye, fluoresce or cast microscopic shadows, outlining the elaborate designs that once adorned a hero's cloak or a goddess's gown. The serene, monochrome masterpieces in our museums were once as vividly colored as the mannequins in a modern department store window. This polychromy was not considered garish. It was the final, essential step toward hyperrealism. A painted statue was a recognizable being. Its rosy cheeks and dark eyelashes made it an immediate, tangible presence for the people who, before it, or walked past it in the public square. The color blurred the line between art and life so effectively that these figures felt less like representations and more like participants in the daily world. This revelation fundamentally shatters our modern aesthetic and forces us to reimagine the classical world as a far more vivid and visceral experience. Beyond the application of color, the final surface treatment itself was a sophisticated art. These final layers of stucco and gold were the ultimate acts of embellishment, transforming a painted statue into a being of breathtaking opulence. A sculptor would mix stucco into a paste as fine as cream, applying it with a delicate brush or a fine stylus. With this pliable material, they could add details too fragile for any chisel. Individual eyelashes, each one a tiny, feathered stroke, could be built up around a stone eye, framing the gaze with a softness that pure marble could never achieve. Intricate necklaces, with beads and pendants that appeared to rest lightly on the collarbone, were molded from stucco. The hem of a gown could be decorated with a repeating pattern of miniature waves or spirals, a texture that would have shattered under the pressure of a drill. Alongside this fine plaster, gold leaf brought a literal divine light to the figure. Artisans would carefully apply tissue-thin sheets of beaten gold to the statue's hair, making it gleam as if perpetually lit by the sun. A warrior's breastplate might be entirely gilded, a blinding signal of status and power, while a goddess's scepter or crown would shimmer with this celestial metal, instantly communicating her otherworldly nature. This combination of textured stucco and reflective gold created a multi-sensory spectacle. As a viewer moved around the statue, the light would dance across these varied surfaces, catching on the raised stucco patterns and flashing from the brilliant gold. It was not a static image, but a dynamic interplay of texture and shine that made the figure feel astonishingly present and alive. This entire sophisticated process, from the first strike of the mallet to the final application of a gilded strand of hair, represented a profound accumulation of skill. How was such intimate, hands-on knowledge, the secrets of marble and wax, of pigments and patinas, passed down from one generation of artists to the next, ensuring that these revolutionary techniques were not lost, but instead refined over centuries? The workshop was the living heart of this artistic tradition, a bustling space where knowledge was not written in books, but passed from hand to hand. Under the watchful eye of a master sculptor, a team of assistants and apprentices learned their craft through a gradual, immersive process. A new apprentice would not be trusted with a fine chisel on his first day. His journey began with the most physically demanding tasks, like roughing out the basic form from a new block of marble, learning through the shock of the mallet the stone's hidden character and its breaking points. Over years, sometimes decades, he would progress to refining the musculature with a claw chisel, and finally, if his skill proved exceptional, to the delicate work of carving a flowing drapery or the intricate patterns of hair. This was a collaborative system designed for both production and education, ensuring that the master's unique style and revolutionary techniques were replicated with unwavering consistency. It was a guild-like structure that preserved hard-won knowledge across generations. The master remained the creative director, overseeing every stage and reserving the most expressive elements for his own hand. He would step in to carve the face, capturing the subtle arch of a brow or the parting of lips that suggested a living thought. He would sculpt the hands, shaping the tension in a clenched fist or the gentle curve of an open palm that whispered a figure's intent. These were the soulful details that transformed a well-executed form into a being with a conscious presence. The legacy of this master-apprentice chain is visible in the distinct styles that art historians can trace across centuries. You can see the echo of a great teacher's touch in the work of his students, a shared understanding of proportion, or a particular way of rendering an eye that becomes a signature, passed down like a family secret. This continuous thread of learning, from one generation to the next, was the invisible framework that supported every leap in realism, making the evolution of ancient sculpture not a series of accidents, but a conscious, cumulative inheritance of genius. This competitive dialogue among masters pushed sculpture to ever greater heights of realism. Was not merely an artist, he was a system builder. His great contribution, a treatise he called the Canon, was a set of mathematical rules that defined the perfect male form. He believed beauty was not a matter of chance, but of precise, harmonious ratios. Every part of the body, from the length of the finger to the width of the shoulder, was calculated to relate perfectly to every other part. His statue, the or spear-bearer, was the physical embodiment of this system, a figure whose balanced contrapposto and muscular perfection made him the absolute standard for centuries. Yet this was a search for an idealized reality, a perfect human machine. Phidias, the master sculptor of the Athenian Acropolis, pursued a different kind of truth, one of divine presence. His most famous works, the colossal statues of Athena and Zeus at Olympia, were crafted in chryselephantine, a breathtaking technique using ivory for the skin and gold for the drapery. Imagine the effect, the warm, luminous ivory of the face and limbs appearing almost soft to the touch, set against the radiant, sun-like brilliance of the gold robes. This was not just a statue, it was an experience designed to overwhelm the viewer with a sense of awe. Genius lay in his ability to make this colossal, divine figure feel approachable and human, infusing the face of Zeus with a benevolent authority that felt both majestic and deeply personal. Then came who dared to challenge the very rules had established. He introduced a new, more slender set of proportions, with a smaller head and longer legs, which gave his figures a taller, more elegant appearance. More importantly, he broke the frontal plane of classical sculpture. His figures seemed to exist in a full 360 degrees of space, inviting you to walk around them to understand their complete story. He captured fleeting, momentary actions, like a man scraping sweat from his body with a strigil, a snapshot of life so immediate it feels as if you have interrupted him. The legacy of these three giants is a powerful reminder that this artistic evolution was not anonymous. It was driven by the distinct personalities and fierce ambitions of individual artists, each building upon the discoveries of the last in a brilliant, cumulative chain of innovation. This progression raises a profound question. What happened to this chain? How could such a sophisticated and deeply ingrained tradition, passed from master to apprentice for generations, ever fade from memory? This philosophical celebration of the human form created a unique artistic environment. While other great civilizations produced magnificent art, their focus was often different. In ancient Egypt, for instance, figures were rendered according to a strict, symbolic code. A pharaoh was depicted with the rigid, frontal posture of eternal power, his size determined by his status rather than by the rules of nature. The goal was not to capture a fleeting moment of life, but to represent an unchanging divine order. Similarly, the colossal guardian figures of Mesopotamia were designed to inspire awe and fear, their stylized muscles and immense scale serving a specific political and religious function. Greek art broke from this tradition by placing the observed human being at the very center of the creative universe. Their artists asked not just what a god should symbolize, but what a god would look like if he walked among them. The answer was found in the most beautiful, powerful, and balanced human forms they could study and imagine. This human-centered worldview, this belief that we are the measure of all things, gave sculptors a sacred mission to replicate the logic and beauty of the natural world. This was not mere imitation, it was a form of reverence. The perfect proportions of a temple were the same harmonies found in a well-trained athlete's body. The calm, rational gaze of a philosopher's statue reflected the ideal of a mind in balance. Every muscle carved, every fold of drapery rendered, was a testament to the belief that truth and beauty were one and the same, and that both could be discovered through careful observation and reason. This intellectual framework empowered the artist in the workshop, transforming their labor from a craft into a philosophical pursuit. The chisel became a tool of inquiry, each strike a question posed to the stone about the nature of life itself. Before a single chisel ever touched the expensive marble, the sculptor's vision came to life in a far more forgiving material. The workshop was filled with small, preliminary models, meticulously crafted from wet clay or plaster. These were the sculptor's sketches in 3 dimensions, a crucial playground for experimentation. Here, the artist could test a new, dynamic pose, adjusting the tilt of a head or the bend of an arm with a simple press of the thumb. They could study how light would fall across the miniature form, observing where sharp shadows would define a muscle and where soft gradients would suggest the curve of a shoulder. This was the stage for solving problems of balance, anatomy, and visual impact, all without the immense risk of a costly mistake in the final stone. Once the small model was perfected, its exact proportions had to be transferred to the massive block of marble waiting in the studio. This was achieved through a methodical process known as the pointing system. Craftsmen would cover the model in a virtual grid of reference points, meticulously measuring the distance of each key feature from this fixed grid. These precise measurements were then scaled up and transferred to the stone block, which was marked with a corresponding grid. Using calipers, assistants would measure inward from the grid on the stone to find the exact spot where a nose began or a knee protruded, chiseling small guide marks into the surface. This painstaking translation from small model to monumental stone was the invisible engineering behind the art. It ensured that the spontaneous energy of the initial clay sketch was not lost, but was instead faithfully and accurately reproduced on a grand scale. This rigorous planning unlocked new possibilities for complexity, allowing for the intricate, intertwined figures of the Hellenistic period and the perfectly balanced torsos of the classical age. It was this disciplined preparation, this marriage of creative freedom and mathematical precision, that gave sculptors the confidence to push realism to its absolute limits, knowing their vision would survive the irreversible journey from soft clay to unyielding stone. A sculpture's final home was as important to its design as the chisel that carved it. These artists were masters of environment, planning their work for the single spot where it would permanently reside. They would visit a temple's inner chamber or a public square, studying how the morning sun streamed through an eastern doorway to rake across a wall. They noted the way flickering lamplight from a specific sconce would dance across a figure's face during an evening ceremony. This knowledge directly shaped the carving. A statue destined for a dimly lit interior might have its eyes carved more deeply, ensuring the pupils would hold a shadowy, penetrating gaze even in the gloom. The subtle folds of a garment might be exaggerated just enough so that the shifting flame of a single oil lamp would animate them, creating the illusion that the cloth was stirring in a gentle breeze. This was not a final adjustment. It was a core part of the initial design, a collaboration between the artist and the architecture itself. Nowhere is this environmental awareness more brilliantly displayed than in the pedamental sculptures crowning great temples. These figures had to fit within a challenging triangular frame, yet appear perfectly natural to the people looking up from far below. The sculptors solved this with ingenious forced perspective. The figures at the peak of the triangle, farthest from the viewer, were carved in the highest, most dramatic relief. Those closer to the corners, nearer to the eye, were carved in progressively shallower relief. This subtle gradient prevented the more distant figures from appearing shrunken or insignificant. Even more cleverly, a reclining figure in a corner might be posed with its head upright and its feet stretched away, a pose that seems awkward when viewed straight on, but resolves into a perfectly relaxed posture when seen from the correct ground-level angle. The sculptor's work was only truly complete when the statue was lifted into its designated place. It was there, bathed in the light it was designed for and viewed from its intended vantage point, that the stone finally came to life. This holistic philosophy, where art was inseparable from its setting, represents one of the most sophisticated forms of realism, a silent dialogue between the statue, the building, and the light that gave them both breath. The most breathtaking sculptures seem to defy their own material, frozen in a single heartbeat of action. An athlete is carved balanced on the very ball of one foot, his entire body leaning into a sprint that has not yet begun. The wind, an invisible force, presses a thin mantle of marble against his leg, the fabric fluttering in sharp, chaotic folds that our minds interpret as a sudden gust. This was the art of a visual trick that invited the viewer's own perception to complete the story. Your brain sees the precariously balanced figure and automatically calculates the physics of the next moment, the inevitable shift of weight that will send him forward. You see the deeply carved, shadowed lines in the drapery and feel the breeze that must have caused them. The sculptor carved the cause, and you, the viewer, supply the effect. This collaboration between artist and audience is what breathes life into the stone. Even the surface texture was part of this grand illusion. By incising thousands of hair thin, curving lines with a fine chisel, an artist could create the shimmering effect of light playing across wet, oiled skin after an athletic competition. The marble itself seems to glisten, capturing a transient sparkle that should be impossible in an unchanging stone. This mastery of implied motion was the ultimate conquest over the stillness of the medium, a proof that the sculptor could command not just form, but time itself. Yet the quest for realism extended beyond these artistic deceptions into a more tangible, chemical realm, where the very surface of the statue was altered through a kind of ancient alchemy. That flawless block of marble began its life deep within a mountain. Before any sculptor could reveal the figure sleeping within the stone, an army had to wrest it from the earth. High on the slopes of Mount, teams of workers faced a monumental task. They would first identify a seam of the finest, most consistent stone, then use iron wedges and heavy wooden mallets to painstakingly create a deep channel around the intended block. They did not have modern explosives, only patience, immense strength, and a profound understanding of the stone's own fracture lines. Once the block was isolated, they would drive a series of dry wooden wedges into pre-cut slots along its base. Then, they poured water over the wood. As the wedges swelled with moisture, they generated a slow, irresistible pressure, a quiet force that would gradually and cleanly split the multi-ton block from the living bedrock. This was a delicate operation. A single miscalculation could shatter the precious stone into worthless fragments. Once free, the raw block was a rough, unremarkable giant. Moving it was the next colossal challenge. Workers used systems of levers, ropes, and wooden rollers to inch the block down the mountainside, a perilous journey that required perfect coordination. The final leg of the voyage was by sea. These heavy stone cubes were loaded onto broad, specially reinforced cargo ships. The journey across the Aegean was fraught with risk, from sudden storms to treacherous coastlines. The loss of a single ship meant the loss of a fortune in raw material and countless months of labor. This entire industrial operation, from quarry to workshop, was astronomically expensive. It was only possible through the backing of wealthy patrons, city-states, or religious institutions who saw the value in funding such artistic ambition. The very existence of these marble masterpieces is a testament not just to artistic genius, but to an entire society's willingness to commit vast resources to the pursuit of beauty. This immense effort, this backbone of industry, made the art possible. Yet the story of these sculptures does not end with their creation in the workshop. The brilliant glow of a classical bronze or the warm flesh tones of a painted marble were not destined to last forever. These masterpieces were not created for the quiet halls of a museum, but for a living and often perilous world. Across the centuries, they faced the ravages of earthquakes that could topple a colossus, fires that could melt a bronze, and the slow, patient erosion of wind and rain. But some of the most significant changes were not acts of nature, but of human will. In times of war or religious upheaval, a statue could be deliberately defaced, its features smashed to strip it of its identity or power. Or in a more practical form of recycling, a marble figure of a god might be hauled away and tossed into a lime kiln, its precious stone burned down to make mortar for a new building. This cycle of creation and destruction is a fundamental part of their long story. Then came the Renaissance, a period that rediscovered and revered these ancient works. Yet this admiration came with a desire to complete them. The practice of restoration was born, but it was guided by the aesthetic ideals of the 16th century, not the 5th century before the Common Era. A missing arm would be not just reattached, but entirely recarved in a contemporary style. A headless goddess might be given a new face, one bearing the serene, idealized features of a Raphael painting rather than the robust, individual character of a classical original. In their zeal to make these broken figures whole again, these later artists often inadvertently obscured the original sculptor's technique. The subtle, almost invisible joins of a separately carved piece, a signature of advanced workshop practice, might be permanently sealed under a new section of marble. The specific, personal touch of the master's chisel was lost under the smooth, confident strokes of a restorer trying to improve upon the past. This history of reception and alteration forces us to look more critically. The perfect, seamless statue in a museum display is often a complex artifact, a conversation across time. Its current form is a palimpsest, a surface on which the original work has been by the values, tastes, and even the mistakes of every era that followed. This journey of damage and repair adds a profound layer to their mystery. It begs the question, how can we possibly see through these centuries of change to understand the sculptor's true, initial vision? The answers are now being uncovered not with a chisel, but with a laser. These invisible histories are now being read with the aid of light. Modern science provides a non-invasive lens, allowing us to see a statue not just as a finished object, but as a recorded document of its own creation. Through techniques like three-dimensional laser scanning, every microscopic undulation of the marble's surface is mapped with pinpoint accuracy. This digital record can be studied from any angle, revealing the subtlest drag of a claw chisel or the faint, arcing groove left by a bow drill, marks that are utterly invisible under normal gallery lighting. Another revolutionary tool, reflectance transformation imaging, works like a kind of computational photography. Researchers take dozens of photographs of a statue, each one lit from a slightly different direction. A computer then combines these images, allowing an expert to digitally relight the surface from any conceivable angle. This can make the ghost of a painted eyebrow suddenly appear from a seemingly blank forehead, or reveal the specific sequence in which the folds of a gown were carved, simply by studying how the light catches the edges of each ancient tool mark. We can now identify not just that a flat chisel was used, but the exact width of its blade. We can see where an apprentice began a section and where the master stepped in to correct a line. These tools even detect evidence of ancient repairs, showing where a broken arm might have been skillfully reattached in the sculptor's own workshop, a testament to the immense value of the original work. This scientific window is confirming long-held theories about workshop practice, while also uncovering completely unexpected methods. We are learning that their process was often even more complex and ingenious than we ever supposed. Science has become our greatest ally, peeling back the centuries not with a scalpel, but with photons and algorithms. This entire journey, from the quarry to the final polish, was driven by a profound and powerful purpose, one that goes far beyond simple imitation. That pursuit of the soul within the stone was driven by a powerful philosophical ideal known as mimesis. For the Greeks, this was far more than simple copying. It was a creative act of representing reality in order to reveal its most perfect, essential form. A sculptor did not just carve a man, he carved the ideal of a man, distilling the very essence of strength, wisdom, or beauty from the imperfect examples he saw in daily life. This was a direct, almost sacred competition with nature itself. The artist's goal was to create something so convincingly real that it could stand beside a living being and hold its own. This ambition fueled legendary tales, like that of the sculptor, who was said to have painted grapes so deceptively lifelike that birds flew down from the sky to peck at them. Another story tells of a rivalry between two great artists, each trying to outdo the other's realism. One painted a curtain so persuasively that his rival, upon arriving for a visit, asked for it to be drawn aside to reveal the painting behind it, only to discover the curtain was the painting. These stories were not just fables, They were a testament to the cultural value placed on this high-wire act of artistic deception. The ultimate challenge, however, was not to fool a bird, but to convince a human soul that another soul looked back from the marble. This was the quest to capture the psyche, the animating spirit of the subject. A successful statue was not a mere likeness, it was a vessel. The subtle parting of the lips, the specific focus in the inlaid eyes, the slight tension in a hand, all conspired to create the undeniable impression of an inner life, of a being with thoughts, memories, and desires. This profound spiritual ambition, this need to create a form that felt truly inhabited, was the true engine that drove centuries of technical innovation. Every advance in understanding anatomy, every refinement in surface polish, every clever trick of inlay and texture, was ultimately in service of this single, monumental goal, to prove that human skill and reason could reach into the very heart of nature and pull forth an ideal that was, in its own way, more real than reality. This symphony of skill, from quarry to final polish, reveals a truth far greater than the sum of its parts. The ancient sculptor's workshop was a crucible where material science met profound anatomical knowledge, where perceptual psychology served a deep philosophical ambition. Each deliberate action, from the first strike of the point chisel to the final application of warm wax and vibrant pigment, was a note in a centuries-long composition. The goal was never mere decoration, but the capture of the human essence itself, a quest to freeze a soul in unyielding stone and enduring bronze. These masterpieces that have survived the ages do not stand as cold, silent relics. They are vibrant testimonies to the incredible power of observation, to the relentless refinement of skill, and to a fundamental human drive to create and to understand our own place in the world. We are left to wonder at their genius, an artistry that forever changed how we see the human form and its potential. If this journey into the heart of ancient creation has captivated you, we would love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And subscribe for more explorations into the greatest mysteries of our shared past.